Welcome to Living Out Loud with your host, Jess Phillips, where we talk all things addictions, codependency, relationships, and the good, bad, and ugly in between. Hi, everybody. My name is Jess Phillips. I'm super grateful you're here. I'm a master's level clinician and a relationship and attachment trauma coach. I help freedom-seeking women regain their confidence, master their triggers, and communicate their needs so they can finally put an end to toxic relationships, low self-worth, feeling like an imposter, and become more authentic, trusting, and secure. I know exactly what it feels like to be spinning in circles, stuck in obsession, and living life with all or nothing thinking. After years of failed relationships, impulsive decisions, yo-yo dieting, and riding emotional roller coasters, I knew I needed to get to the root of my issues and that I couldn't go on like this any longer. And that's exactly why I created the 10-week Secure Self-Coaching Program. I was tired of wasting time and money on professionals that didn't understand me. And I knew that trying to fix my own problems with the same thinking that got me there wasn't going to help me get any closer to my goals. If this sounds like you, feel free to send me a message and we'll set up a free consultation call to see if my program is right for you. You can find the link to my website in the show notes. Now back to the show. Enjoy. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Living Out Loud with your host, Jess Phillips. Super excited today to have my friend Bev Mitelman on, founder of Securely Loved, who is a certified attachment practitioner. Welcome, Bev.
Thanks, Jess. So happy to be here.
So excited. So, I just want to kind of let everybody know how we met. I feel like the majority of my guests on this podcast come from like the World Wide Web, just complete strangers that I've met through COVID or even now. We talk so much about these like ups and downs of social media and are they good, are they bad? But it's like when they're put to good use, I've met some super cool people. So just wanted to kind of give the audience a little backstory on how we met, how we connected, and what it is you do and why you do it.
Excellent. So yeah, I think this was definitely a good use of the internet. I love to reach out to other folks who are doing similar work. So I ran across your profile on LinkedIn, and I know that you do quite a bit of work in the area of attachment theory, attachment trauma. And then I saw that you are from Montreal. And I said, this is a person that I need to reach out to. So I'm a former Montrealer. I now live in Toronto. All of my clients are in the United States, actually, which is interesting. So it really is, a world without borders. And so, I sent you a message saying, hey, we do similar work. Let's connect. And you were so beautifully responsive. So thank you for that.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. I love it. I just think it's so cool and I guess this is what used to happen organically back in the day, I don't know, 20 years ago, but now we have this different luxury of being able to say, "Hey, I know everything about you and I've, creeped your profile and let's connect." But yeah, you touched on that attachment piece and I do think it's super cool. And I think we're getting better at it as a society, but more and more now we talk about these ideas of codependency and attachment trauma. And, I remember when I started to first post about it, and a lot of it was coming from personal experience and a lot of experience being in the recovery space for so long, but being told you're codependent and that's just, it is what it is. But it's not really enough, right? It's not really enough to kind of just wear this label around and say like I'm terrible in relationships and I'm just a codependent and that's that. So I think as I journeyed in my own sobriety journey, I started to learn more about why is it? What happened? What is it that's making us behave the way we do in romantic relationships, sometimes platonic relationships. So I got personally very curious and I started to share more and more about it and the response from people. And sometimes I don't know if this is just me, but sometimes I think I'm the only one struggling with the things that I'm struggling with. But as soon as I started to talk about it publicly, the outpour of messages that I would get from people saying, "Oh my God, I'm in that type of relationship. Oh my God, I had that type of father, that type of mother." And then I was like, I think I should be talking about this more. And it's really become my focus in coaching, in therapy. And for me, it's such a beautiful framework that explains so much, and I think it's just super cool that we're in the same space talking about a lot of the same things. So, what is it that got you into attachment work specifically?
Yeah, that's such a beautiful sentiment that you shared. I, like a lot of practitioners, and like you just shared, I originally found this work years ago because I was also on my own journey to figure out, okay, why was I thinking the way that I thought? And why, I was at times my behavior was emotionally dysregulated. Like I felt easily overwhelmed, frustrated. I had all of these feelings that were uncomfortable. I had sought out different various types of therapy, right? So, many years ago, again, we didn't really talk about attachment. So if you were having some struggles, you would go to more conventional types of therapy like CBT or inner child. And so that work that I did with therapists over the years, it sort of helped me sort of to understand a little bit of why, based on some things that I experienced in my own childhood and parenting and whatnot, why I would be feeling the way that I did, but it never brought me to a place of, okay, I understand that I have anxiety. Now, how do I move out of that phase? How do I stop feeling, for example, I don't like being in large crowds. I get uncomfortable. How do
Mhm.
I get myself to a place where I stop feeling uncomfortable? Where does that come from? And for me, exposure therapy was only helpful to my new degree. So, long story short, we all go on our different version of a journey. And I literally tripped over this work years ago. And when I started to understand attachment, the impact that it had on my own mind, my emotional patterns, my thought patterns, my behavior, my coping mechanisms, all of it was tied to my attachment issues. That gave me a path and a way forward to start moving out of living in this fight or flight mode. Because my nervous system was, at that point in time, so dysregulated
Mhm.
that I know I was just in survival mode. And I knew I was detached. I knew because, I was great at detaching from the things that overwhelmed me, but I also knew that I was detached from the things that gave me pleasure. And so, it's a double-edged sword. And so when this type of work, integrated attachment work, was so helpful for me, that's when I said, okay, this is something that I need to share with the world. And before that, I had been working an executive job. I'd worked for about 20 years in the executive space of learning and development, personal growth. I was developing large scale training programs on communication and diversity and dealing with difficult people. So I was always in that human resources space.
Mhm.
And at the same time, I had these personal struggles. And so moving over into becoming an attachment practitioner is almost like a natural transition for me. And so now I get to work with people all over the world. I mean, I have clients in the States. I have one client in New Zealand, and he's wonderful. I have a hard time understanding his accent sometimes,
I bet. I bet.
doing my best.
Yeah.
And because, really, I think my passion is how can we get people to understand where their patterns are coming from, but then to overcome them because it's not enough to just say, it is what it is, right? I am this type of person. It's like we know very well that there are many things about our physical bodies that we can improve on, right? We can go to the gym, we can eat better, we can have
Mhm.
proper sleep hygiene, and the mind is the same thing. You
Mhm.
can work with it to overcome some of the challenges, right? So, yeah, I think that this work is very helpful and it's eye-opening when
Mm.
people start to really see the impacts.
It's so interesting. Thank you for sharing all of that. And there's one thing I definitely want to circle back to that you said. You mentioned also feeling disconnected from your joy. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that and what that means?
Yeah, it's like it's a two-edged sword, right? Or like a double-sided coin because what we do when we're in survival mode is when something becomes overwhelming for us, our body oftentimes will shut off, will
Mm.
shut down, right?
Mhm.
Like, and we see this in nature too. Like, if the threat is so big, you'll see an animal will play dead. That is a survival strategy because they know they can't go up against that threat. It's too big, so they'll play dead.
Mm,
And it's very interesting because, in some regards, we do the same thing as humans. We do shut down when something is too overwhelming or we have the potential to. Not everyone does. And that disconnects us. So it serves a purpose because it disconnects us from the really difficult emotions that we're having, we're struggling to deal with and
mhm,
process. But it also disconnects us from the emotions that we enjoy, that bring us pleasure, that bring us joy, right? So there's no way to just disconnect from some emotions. That's
yep,
what I'm trying to say is that
yep,
either you're connected to your sensation and you're allowing your body and your mind to feel all of your emotions or you're not,
yeah,
right? And emotions are a very interesting thing because we tend to ascribe attributes to emotions, right? Like this one is good and this one is
mhm,
bad.
mhm,
But the truth of the matter is that emotions are neutral.
mm,
They're just there to guide us.
mhm,
And at some point in time, we either learn to hone in and really pay attention to what some people call it intuition, some people have a sense of things, they call it a spidey sense, or if something is making you very angry, we might have been really young where we were learned that, I'll use myself as an example. As a little girl, I was taught children are to be seen and not heard.
mm,
And so, look cute and sit in the corner and smile. And so if I was angry, that was not an emotion that was acceptable in my house.
mhm.
So I learned to suppress it. But you know what happens when you suppress anger? It
Sure
doesn't go so
do.
because it comes out in all sorts of other ways,
Yeah,
right? It's still there. And anger's your friend.
yeah,
Anger is the one actually who's telling you when you're being disrespected. Anger
mm,
comes up when you know you're up against something that doesn't feel right, like
mhm,
someone is wronging you. So we learn to disconnect from our emotions when actually they are there to provide us with such incredible guidance.
mm,
So yeah, reconnecting I think is really important. And then we talk about, living our truest authentic self and living life to the fullest. That's allowing yourself to feel that whole array and spectrum of emotions because it
mm.
really is beautiful.
I love that. Yeah, very well explained. And I think it goes back to what you were speaking about before is that nervous system dysregulation, right? That's not just for the negative things that happen in our life. It can be if we're completely dysregulated. I mean, I work with a ton of perfectionists, let's say, who are just like crossing off that to do list and they're convinced the next thing, the next degree, the next move, the next 20 pounds, that's going to be the thing that hits. And then it happens and they get it. And personally, I've experienced this too in the past where I'm just pushing so hard for this one thing and I get it and I can't feel anything. And
Mm.
I was really sure that this was going to be the thing, but meanwhile just forcing your body sometimes too to just you're so convinced that the degree on the wall or the relationship or I have so many people come to me and just it's a very confusing feeling too. It's like you get everything you want and then you're sitting there with it and you're not feeling right inside. So,
So
yeah.
interesting that you say you get everything you want because if you peel back the layers, and I'm sure that you've actually done this for your own self,
Mm,
it's that a lot of times we're misguided in actually what we want,
mhm,
right? So perfectionism, and I deal with this myself. I
mhm,
am a perfectionist. I've learned to let go of certain things because they don't serve me, but if you leave me running on, my high motor, I do tend to go into that area. But, when I looked at my own patterns, I realized very early on that perfectionism is what got me love and attention. So when I came home with straight A's on my report card, I got a lot of praise, I got a lot of love, I got a lot of attention, I felt seen,
mhm,
right? And so you internalize subconsciously these patterns and you repeat them and you repeat them. And so what you're really after is that love and acceptance and that praise because that validation feels good, especially from the ones that you really love and you really respect and you want to be seen and you want to go, look, I did it, right?
yeah,
It's almost like a little child going,
yeah,
oh,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Look, at it. got a degree.
Yeah.
It is that primal. And
Yeah.
so you think you're after the degree, but and so then you got the degree in your hand and you're like, huh,
Hmm.
not really feeling what I thought I would feel.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're misguided in
Yeah.
terms of what it is that you're truly after. So I don't know if you felt that way also. And this is very common when we see folks who
Mhm.
are experiencing burnouts,
Yeah, for
right?
sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think too, like being in recovery and being sober became this climb to almost prove to yourself or to clear up the wreckage of the past, but become this person that was like, okay, I was never a disaster in the first place. Like this is who I am
Mhm,
now. All the
mhm.
while just really ignoring a lot of the gifts or a lot of the I mean, I'd say a good 50% of my knowledge today and my ability to help people was through a lot of feeling humbled by my own behavior from the past, right? So the mistakes that I've made or the choices that I've made in the past they're some of my greatest gifts today. So this idea of being perfect or doing it right never really existed anyways, but it can be difficult to like in the moment to convince yourself otherwise. So it was always like, if I do this or I would take jobs. I remember in my 20s and I would look at the salary, I'd look at the job. I wasn't even really that interested in it, but I was like, I'll figure out how to do it and I'm sure I'll be happy once I'm in it. And then 6 months in it, when you're getting your paycheck, it's not even fueling your soul inside. So a lot of it was for the outside for a while. And I think also too, one of the gifts of getting older is I already feel such a shift between my 20s and my less of a feeling of having to prove myself or do things for others. Now it's just like, what do I want to do? How do I best serve others? What am I good at? What are my strengths rather than what do other people think?
Yeah, that's such a beautiful point that you bring up. So self-worth, confidence, because of course they're very connected. These are things that they're learned skills,
Mm,
right? So some people grow up in a home where they feel very secure in the relationships they have with their primary caregivers. These are the folks that we would call securely attached.
mhm,
They're given a fair amount of space to express themselves and, they develop a good sense of self-worth and identity and a trust that with the with people around them because
mhm,
that trust is patterned into their subconscious mind because when they would have interacted with their parents would have been for the most part emotionally attuned,
mhm,
right? So these folks grow up with a good sense of self-worth, confidence. They're not the individuals that need to seek external validation
mhm,
because they give it to themselves. They learned how to give it to themselves, right?
mhm,
Because it was modeled for them. And that's so beautiful for these individuals and for the parents who are able to give them that gift to their child. But if we look at reality, that is a slice of the population.
mhm,
The other slice, the bigger slice of the population, didn't grow up in homes where they learned about emotional dysregulation, where they felt, a level of attunement from their caregivers. So maybe they experienced things like neglect, or maybe they experienced things like abandonment or perceived abandonment. Or maybe there was an extreme amount of chaos in the household. And there's so many scenarios for this, which could encompass any and all kinds of abuse. We could be talking about, let's say, families that had a very difficult divorce situation. We could talk about families that, one or two of the parents are dealing with addictions. We could talk about families where one or two of the caregivers are dealing with mental illness. I bring all this into conversation to say that there are many children who grow up into adults who come out of homes where they were surrounded by chaos. They were not taught emotional regulation skills. And then they come out into the world and they have what we call an insecure attachment. And I know that you've talked about this quite a bit on This Is Your Jam as well, right?
mhm,
It's so interesting. And this greatly impacts their thought patterns and their emotional patterns. So one of the things that we see really sharply, really strongly in individuals who are anxious, preoccupied, or who lean in that direction is this need for external validation.
Mhm.
And so this is what you talked about, is because they simply didn't learn how to give it to themselves. These folks do not know how to self-soothe.
Yeah.
So they have to turn to other people to get that external validation, that constant reassurance. Am I doing okay? Is this right? Did I make a mistake? Or in a romantic relationship, are we okay? Are you mad at me? Because they're
Mhm.
worried, right? They can't,
Mhm.
and this is how they, and that's them being in survival mode. This is how they emotionally regulate. So, I want to be very careful when we talk about attachment issues that we're talking about learned behavior.
Mhm.
This is not akin, it's not the same as a personality disorder, mental illness. And it's not what we're talking about. It really is, some children grow up in a home where, for example, they learn how to cook, right? Great.
Mhm.
Some children grow up in a home and they don't learn how to cook, right? Right? And that's just that. And so emotional regulation is a skill that is learned. Some have it and some don't. But
Yeah.
to go back to our original point, it's not enough to just say, oh, well, I had a difficult childhood, so I am who I am.
Yeah.
That's not true,
Yeah.
right? You absolutely can do work to understand your patterns and then change your patterns.
Yeah.
Just like, and it's the committed effort like anything else in the body. So if I put on extra weight and I go to the doctor and I see that, oh boy, this is impacting my cholesterol, my sugar levels aren't good, like I can see that there's having impacts on my body,
Mhm.
right? So the doctor is going to probably look at me and say, it would be good for you to lose a little bit of weight.
Mhm.
They're not going to say, listen, you're fine at this weight. And they have evidence, right? That I'm not fine.
Mhm.
Don't worry about it. Have another cheeseburger. You are who you are. They're not going to say that because they know that we can make changes to the physical body in the same way that we can make changes to our mind. Our mind and our body are part of the same system. So, the I am who I am excuse only brings us so far.
Yeah, very well said. And it's true. There's so many different areas of life that we can do that with, like you hear exactly with the weight loss example. It's my metabolism, it's this, it's that, right?
I
And it's
don't have time. That's my
yeah,
favorite one. I don't have time. I'm
yeah.
like, okay.
Yeah, yeah, and I get it, I get it. I think of myself in the past. I mean, I grew up in a very solution-focused home where there wasn't a lot of room for feelings, so which is a good and a bad thing. It made me an extremely goal-oriented, solution-focused person, but at the same time, when I did need a little bit of a softer approach, and a little bit more space for the feelings, there wasn't that much space. So, it was interesting. It was also a journey for me to understand how so many people think differently. And I remember when I first started in the therapy space, I would often speak to my supervisor about like, how do I stay in this stuckness with a client? The stuckness for me, I'm like, I got to get out. Give me the solution, I'll do it. If it's a 4-year degree, I'll do it. If it's a move, I'll do it. But there's so many people out there that stay and remain in that stuckness, and I have too in my own areas, but this ability to say, it's because of this, this is the way I am, so I'm just gonna kind of perch on this branch and stay here for a little while. I'm not sure. I have a very small threshold for tolerance to be able to stay there personally. So when I started to watch other people do it, I was like, okay. And she helped me greatly in that. Why is it that some people, and bringing it back to attachment or to dating, choose to stay in those, let's say, toxic relationships or relationships with narcissists, for example, where they know deep down that their needs are probably never going to be able to get met. Why would they choose to stay in that stuckness instead of doing something about it?
It's such a great, you bring up
Mhm.
so many good points. I'm sort of struggling. Okay, where do I take this next, right? Because the stuckness is real. So
Mm,
people have to be ready and willing to make a change. Everyone, I believe, is capable, right, of learning. of growing. In fact, it's one of our main human needs is
Mhm.
growth, right? But there's so many different things that we deal with on any given day that we mentally prioritize things. So, you know, um, and we see this all the time, right? Come January, everyone is, I'm to the gym.
Yeah.
January tends to be the month that people are like, okay, I'm going to focus on fitness. And then, a couple months later, they may be focusing on something else. So someone has to be ready to make the commitment
Mhm.
towards change because it's an investment in terms of time, in terms of emotional engagement. It's not easy work. Not everyone wants to put a mirror up to their face. And so, listen, goes through their journey when they are ready. But the biggest thing that I found with this idea of stuckness is that you have to learn to be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Mhm.
So a lot of the things that we do, especially our coping behaviors, what they do is they take us away from that feeling of being uncomfortable. So it's a distraction, right? And so
Yeah.
if we look at any of these coping behaviors that we use, good or bad, it serves one purpose. It distracts us from the emotion
Yeah.
that we don't want to feel. And so when therapists and practitioners and healers, we talk about the fact that the only way to heal is to go through, it's about actually allowing yourself to feel that sensation, honoring the sensation, making changes if you need to, and then learning to accept it as part of your life, learning to accept that that emotion is there to guide you, right?
Mhm.
So instead of running away from you, that level of acceptance is when you start to heal. It's very easy for outsiders to say to a woman, for example, who is in a relationship, let's just use, with a narcissistic male, let's use that as a general example.
Mhm.
It's very easy for us to say, well, why does she stay?
Mhm.
Like, I would never put up with something like that. I mean, so
Mhm.
those judgmental comments don't help us at all.
Mm-mm.
Um, and again, just as we prioritize sort of the things that we want to focus on in our life, we also prioritize our human needs. So they change over time. And so for a lot of people, love and connection is their top need. And so they feel that if they give up this person who's not meeting all of their needs and only some of their needs, they feel like they're going to, well, then they give up everything. They give up love and connection,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And this goes very, very deep, right?
Mhm.
Because when we're in fight or flight mode, we don't have the ability for rational thought.
Yeah.
Right? And so these folks oftentimes are just in survival mode. They're just trying to get through the day. Going back to attachment theory again, right? It depends on where they fall in the attachment spectrum. But for a lot of people, losing their romantic partner, their love interest is devastating. And people, I've heard from my clients and conversations with folks is they stay with someone to avoid the pain of leaving them.
Yeah.
So I've heard other people talk about how we, really everything that we do in terms of human behavior is really divided in principle into two objectives, right? One is to seek pleasure and the other is to avoid pain.
Mhm.
It's so interesting is if
Mhm.
you break that down, it actually does describe, for the most part, most of the things that we do as humans.
For sure.
In that person's mind, they've done this mental calculation that it's going to cause me more pain, right? So I'm going to, wait it out. And then you throw in all these sprinkles of hope, like, well, maybe it'll get better, or maybe it'll change, or maybe, and so there's lots of reasons that we do the things we do.
Yeah. 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 That was so well explained. And I love that, it's like that seeking pleasure. And it really, It's difficult. It's really difficult to, and I work with a lot of clients on this, to almost have to this idea of fake it till you make it, right? This idea
Mm.
of like I can maybe visualize a person 1 year down the line that can either have boundaries or stand up for herself or whatever it is. But if you really, it is so hard in the moment. It's like saying no to the cookies or the brownies and imagining that you could be fit a year down the line. It's really hard. It's really hard to say no to that immediate gratification.
Oh, 100%,
Yeah.
especially like, 'cause so that's it, right? Is that there are many things in our lives that give us that immediate pleasure, but
Mhm.
are harming us in the
Yep.
long term. And your
Yep.
analogy to the cookies is such a good analogy. I mean, I won't lie, like there's this craving that I get. It's not every night, thankfully. It's often
Yeah.
around 9 o'clock at night. I'm like, really in the mood for some ice cream.
Yep.
It hits around the same time. It's like my mind is programmed, right?
Yeah.
A few spoonfuls of ice cream. And I have to have that conversation with myself, right? And some days I give in,
Yeah.
and some days I go, no, you know what? My longer term goal is more important.
Yeah.
We can only do this when we are not in fight or flight, when we're not in survival mode, when we can apply critical thought, right? And we can sort of weigh out risks and benefits.
Yeah.
So it is unfair for us to look at someone else's situation and say, in such a judgy way, well, I would never stand for that.
Yeah.
There's certainly things that I have done and said
Mhm.
when I was in a heightened emotional state, when I myself was, emotionally dysregulated. Which, by the way, here's the interesting thing is that when you're emotionally dysregulated, you're only partially aware that you are. Looking back
Mhm.
now I can say to myself, oh my God, was I dysregulated?
Mhm.
Because I know what it feels like to actually be calm now.
Yeah.
I had lived my entire life on such high alert. Like I would wake up in the morning and I was like, on any given morning, I was like an 8 or 9 out of 10. I
Mhm.
woke up in
Yeah.
terms of my anxiety and in
Yeah.
terms of my hypervigilance and like go, go, go and got to achieve.
Yeah.
And so if anything happened in that span of a day, like I really wasn't I didn't have a lot of emotional bandwidth to deal with anything, right? So someone would look at me in a way, of course, at the time I would think, why are they looking at me like that? What are they trying to say? Like you personalize all this stuff.
Mhm.
And you learn later on to realize not to personalize this stuff. But the reason I bring that into conversation is because I had so little emotional bandwidth that if the smallest of things would happen, I was close to exploding. It's like a
Yeah.
like a little volcano that's like always simmering near the surface,
Yeah.
right? So now that I know what it is to feel calm, and I wake up in the morning, I'm like a 1 or 2.
Yeah.
Things are just different. It's different. And now I can see how dysregulated I was.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that was perfectly explained. It's true. You don't see it while you're in it, and when you look back, I mean hindsight's always 2020, but you look back and the choices that you make too when you're at an 8 or a 9 are completely different than the choices you're going to make at a 1 or a 2.
You're in survival mode,
Yeah.
right? Like, I think that's where the level of compassion needs to come in.
Mm.
Yeah, there's like, we don't know what we don't know. That's why learning and growth is so important. Like,
Yeah.
because, like, I tend to use food as analogy a lot, but,
Mhm.
like, if you've only eaten chicken, you don't know, for example, that you would enjoy, a steak even
Mhm.
more. And then when you eat a piece of steak, you're like, oh my god, this is the utopia. I'm not going back to the chicken.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
to use food as an analogy. So
Yeah.
so, I mean, I was eating chicken my entire life, and that's all I knew. That's what I thought was normal. My
Yeah.
mind was, and people would tell me, "You're so on edge." Okay, I don't know how to not be on edge.
Yeah.
Like, this is my baseline.
Yeah.
So, but looking back, I can see it now,
Yeah.
right? Now that I've had a different experience.
Yeah. Yeah. That was
Now
great.
that I've tasted
Now
steak.
that you've had the nice steak instead of the boiled chicken with no seasoning.
That's right,
Yeah.
right? Because now I've been exposed to something else.
Yeah.
But in order to expose myself to something else, to expose myself to a calm mind, I needed to learn how to heal.
Yeah.
I needed to recognize that I had work to do, which is tough, right? Because our
Yeah.
ego gets in the way. Our
Yeah.
ego gets in the way, right? Like we're like, "No, I'm fine." Especially someone who's perfectionist. "No, I'm good. I'm killing it."
Yep.
Well,
Yep.
are
Yep.
you?
Yeah. Totally. Totally. And is that
Yeah.
where you see a lot of your clients? Like, do they come to you at this fork in the road where they've kind of hit this emotional bottom in dating, let's say, for example, and they say, I keep dating the same unavailable person over and over again. What's your main type of clientele?
I tend to work mostly with women in the ages of, let's say, 35 to 60, 40 to 60. A lot of these women have been in long-term relationships,
Okay.
and oftentimes they come to me for various reasons. One, there's a breakup and they're experiencing complicated grief, which is a common thing that happens for individuals who have an insecure attachment. So like we mentioned earlier, if someone is anxious preoccupied, their core wound is I will be abandoned.
Mm-hmm.
So if in fact the situation plays out where there is an end to their romantic relationship, that will absolutely feel like abandonment to them, and
Mm-hmm.
it'll touch, not touch, it'll stab deeply into a core wound that already exists within them. And so what we get out of that is a term that we call complicated grief, where someone stays in that yearning and mourning and grief cycle far longer than someone who would not have that core wound. And then there's lots of other factors here, but they have, really a difficult time in accepting the reality. They're oftentimes, again, they're anxious, preoccupied as an example, thinking that they did something wrong. And so it hits at a really, really deep level. So oftentimes folks will come to me because they're trying to get through like a breakup, a heartbreak, and they feel stuck. And so that's a lot of the work that I do. I also do quite a bit of work with individuals who recognize themselves that, and I applaud them for that, that they are not as emotionally regulated. They can tell
Mm-hmm.
that they feel explosive, and it doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
So they want to regulate their own nervous system. Or, some of my clients, a lot of times I'm dealing in the realm of romantic relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an interesting thing because, and you and I, we were talking about this before we hit record on this. So attachment issues come out strongest in the context of romantic relationships, although
Mm-hmm.
attachment issues can affect any relationship that we have with friends, with colleagues, certainly with family. We get triggered the most intensely vis-a-vis our romantic partner when people are in the context of a romantic relationship.
Yeah, from what I've noticed with clients over the years, I would say the level of threat is higher in the romantic relationships, right? Because I've seen quite a lot of codependence, anxiety in platonic relationships or with colleagues and work. But I think that that level of vulnerability when you're in a romantic relationship and you've really given yourself to somebody, I think the abandonment threat is a lot higher than it would be with a buddy or a job that you can replace a little more easily.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, super well said. It's just
Yeah.
going to hit deeper.
Yeah.
So it's because a romantic relationship, for the most part, mirror as closely as we can get to the relationship that we once had with our caregivers. So
Mhm.
if you think about it, when we were younger, we were so dependent on our caregivers for our survival. It really was life or death, right?
Mhm.
The first couple of years, we need to be attached and connected to them. That is our identity. That is our survival. We don't
Mhm.
survive without attachment,
Mhm.
right? And of course, as a result, we afford our caregivers like a tremendous amount of trust. And when we get into romantic relationships years later, that individual becomes a person that we're now affording the most amount of trust. We're now counting on them, we're relying on them.
Mhm.
There's all of these deep emotional bonds that we're creating with that person that resemble the closest to the types and depth of bonds that we once had with our caregivers.
Yeah.
That's why it's so triggering. So you're right, the threat is higher.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Makes a lot of sense.
yeah.
And do I know we spoke a little bit about this earlier. Do you walk a lot of people So you're talking about this idea of complicated grief and doing a lot of mending of past relationships. But what about your clients that want to move forward? Do you do a lot of coaching around the dating scene, like getting people back into that dating scene?
I do, I do.
Okay.
So this is one of my favorite topics to address, and I hope we have the opportunity to talk about
Yeah.
dating,
Yeah.
in maybe a follow-up podcast, or because it's such a large topic.
You definitely will. There's never enough time. There's never enough time, you know? We're
No,
gonna
I
make
know the
more.
time always goes fast.
Yeah.
But dating and finding your compatible mate is such an interesting process because in order to do that really effectively, you have to actually really understand yourself. And many people will fight you on this. Of course, I understand myself. I know my mind. Okay, but do you really understand what drives you? Do you understand your patterns? When folks come to me, the work that we do is not just, tell me about your childhood, but I usually go right to, okay, tell me about something that happened last week that, got you really upset or frustrated or overwhelmed. So
Mhm.
I'm looking for the trigger points that are happening in today's environment
Mhm.
to figure out, okay, what thoughts are connected to that? Why did you think that's what happened? Or what meaning did you ascribe to it? And
Yeah.
then we could trace back to, okay, which core wound is this likely attached to? So it could be attached to a core wound like, I feel, unloved,
Mhm.
or I'm not likable, or I feel disrespected. I feel that I'll be betrayed. I will be abandoned. Fear that, I will lose my independence. There's so many core wounds that people carry. And what they don't realize is that these patterns, the mind is almost like a computer program. The
Mhm.
mind just on autopilot repeats these patterns. So we try to break the patterns. We try to see which one of those triggers are still existing inside of you.
Mhm.
We try to go back and understand the core wounds, and then we can reprogram the core wounds. There's ways that we can tap into the subconscious mind to build new narratives around, so I am unlovable.
Mm.
I am lovable. And there's lots of evidence because I can see, these 18 things that give me evidence that in
Mhm.
fact I am lovable. We have to start opposing some of these stories.
Mhm.
This is a lot of work. People again run on autopilot,
Yeah.
right? And they think, well, if I happen to think I'm unlovable, there's nothing I can do about that. No, really, there is actually.
Yeah.
And once we tackle those core wounds, we also look again at emotional patterns, communication patterns, relationship to boundaries,
Mm.
um, your coping mechanisms, like all of these things play out in terms of your personality and your needs. How are you currently? What are you doing to get your needs met? Do you even understand what your needs are?
Mhm.
Like, I can tell you very clearly that I was like a 40-year-old woman and I had no idea what my needs are.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was consumed by most of my 20s and 30s. I was married young, I had kids young. I loved, having my kids young, and I have zero regrets. I love my kids to death. But I lost myself in those years. I didn't remember who I was. And so when we're talking about dating, I always say it's really important to understand yourself first. So if you understand that, you know, transparency, that's a big need of mine.
Mhm.
So I spent most of my life as a fearful avoidant. My
Mhm.
core wound would be I will be betrayed.
Mhm.
That's sort of my starting point. So I have a bit of a, suspicious nature
Yeah.
for good reason. I'm not, I'm not putting myself down. I'm certainly not placing judgments. But so for me, I know that I need my partner to be really transparent with me, right?
Mhm.
It's not because I'm trying to catch them in a lie, but it's
Right.
because that's what provides me safety. That's what makes me feel calm. On a physical sense, for example, I know one of my needs is I need a fair amount of sleep. And so I know that about myself. And
Mhm.
so, once you go through the process of understanding yourself really well, you then
Yeah.
can paint a really clear picture of this is the type of individual that I would invite into my life who would be a compatible partner.
Yeah.
intellectually, emotionally, in terms of lifestyle. But, most people, the dating world today is interesting because they most people have a laundry list of the partner they're looking for. And I see this so often. Most of the time people are like, I want someone laid back, who's chill, who knows how to go with the flow. But the individual asking for these things is none of those things. Like if you meet them and you go out on a date with them, you can see in 5 minutes that there's all this pent up anger.
Yeah.
But you want someone who's chill. So
Yeah.
I tell people first become person
Yeah.
that you're trying to attract. Become that person. If you
Yeah.
want someone who's authentic and honest and transparent, become that person. Then you will attract others who are like-minded.
Yeah. Love that. So true. It's so true. And I'm so grateful, it's a lot of those principles too were taught in recovery and getting sober and, like if you want to create this new life with these new opportunities, we need to look inside first. What's going on? Clear away that wreckage, clear away the lies, the whatever chaos we've caused because unfortunately, like attracts like, and for a long time, I was walking around the world just attracting exactly how I felt inside, and I had no idea. Like, I didn't know it was that powerful. If I was being dishonest inside, I'm gonna have dishonest people around me. If I had that nervous energy, I'm gonna have that around me. So it's, yeah, a great starting point. But I have so many questions in regards to dating and attachment styles. So yes, for the sake of time, we will put a pin in this one, but, I'd love to pick your brain about different attachment styles and suggestions for dating. Like I get asked a lot of questions. Should I steer clear from this group of people altogether? Like, should I ever date an avoidant again? Right. And I don't believe in the black and whites like that. I think there's plenty of room for, to be a little bit more subjective and nuanced. And it's about more than who the actual person is. But yes, at the end of the day, there probably are some non-negotiables that might be helpful to steer clear from when you are dating again. So I will have you back on and we'll do, a couple of mini episodes on dating and attachment styles going forward.
I love that. There's
Yeah.
so much to say here. There's
Yeah.
so much to say here. So,
Yeah.
I'm happy to come back on and talk about dating and attachment styles. I think that's super fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, remember that what you're saying is, like attracts like. That is true. And in a future episode, I'd like to really talk a little bit about the signs of attraction because that's also interesting.
Yeah.
But, if you think of it logically too, if you're not ready to really invest in your own growth and you don't you don't see an issue with your own emotional patterns and your own thought process, like in that it's not causing you problems at work or with your friends, you're not in distress about it, you're not going to pair up or seek out the friendship or romantic partnership of someone who's going to require more from you.
Yeah.
You're just
Yeah.
not. You're going to find someone who is at the same level as you emotionally because you're not ready to level up. And so it's very common for folks who have insecure attachment to partner up with other people who have insecure attachments. And then, in this like chaotic way, they feed off each
Mm.
other in negative ways. An individual who is coming out of the healing process in terms of understanding their attachment wounds, they will naturally seek out someone who is safe, reliable, and secure, because
Mhm.
that's how they're starting to feel about themselves. And so, I see this transition a lot with my clients. I saw it with myself as well.
Yeah.
9 out of 10 times, the reason a man doesn't get a second date with me is because I can see they're emotionally dysregulated. And it's not to be judgy. I'm not,
Yeah.
but I want someone who's done the work. I want someone who could be a partner, right? Like
Mhm.
I don't want another client.
Definitely not.
All right.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, not to say that I'm perfect. I'm far from perfect.
Yeah.
I need my partner to be perfect, but emotionally regulated. That's a deal breaker for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Get it. Get it.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you for taking the time to come on and chat with the listeners about a little bit about who you are and what you do. And so, if anybody wanted to get into contact with you, can you just talk a little bit about your website and any social media handles that you're active on?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity too.
Mhm.
So I am a certified attachment practitioner. I am the founder of a company called Securely Loved, and we are a collective of certified attachment practitioners who work with folks to help address and heal their insecure attachment issues. So to move more towards a secure attachment. My website is securelyloved.com, and we're also on Instagram. So securely underscore loved. Or you could type my name into any browser, Bev Middleman, and you'll see I'm sort of all over the internet. You'll
Yeah.
see my YouTube videos come up or whatnot. So, yeah, we offer a free intro call. I do speak with all prospective clients first, just to make sure that we're aligned in terms of the services and what your needs are. And then we go from there. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to share my work and some of my
Yeah.
thoughts. This was yeah, a fun conversation.
Awesome. It really was. And I'll add all the links to the show notes so people can find you there. And yeah, you and I will connect again and we'll do a little plan for mini dating and attachment style mini series going forward. I'm sure everybody will look forward to that. Again, Bev, thank you so much for taking the time to come on, and it was a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks everyone for listening and supporting Living Out Loud. Be sure to tune in next week for another fun, juicy episode.